Welcome everyone to this webinar on deliberate practice for emotionally focused couples therapy. My name is Alex Vash. I am with my everlasting partner, Tony Rumenair, and we are very happy to have with us our guest expert, Sharon Mead. So here is Sharon, but even better, you can see her here on the Zoom window. So let me just very briefly introduce Sharon. So Sharon is a licensed marriage and family therapist. She does couples therapy, premarital counseling, and individual therapy with adults. She's a certified emotionally focused therapist, I should say, and supervisor candidate. And she's also trained in deliberate practice supervision through the Sentio Counseling Center. So we are very happy to have you, Sharon. So let's go back here. So today's topic is on the integration of deliberate practice with emotionally focused couples therapy. Just a quick note from our sponsor, Tony. You want to take it away?
Sure. Alex and I are with the Sentio Counseling Center. We provide low-fee online counseling for individuals and couples, starting $30 a session. So if you have any referrals for low-fee couples therapy in California, please consider us. And we also do intensive training for supervisors. That's good, Alex. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, deliberate practice training for supervisors. Great. So, some of you may have attended some of our webinars. They're all available, the recordings on our YouTube. We always start in the same fashion. I'll be very brief here with a single idea on the difference between conceptual learning or conceptual teaching and procedural learning. So this is a very important distinction for our field. In our field, most of the training resources available, we would consider to be conceptual training resources. So what does that mean? It means trying to learn therapy or learn about therapy through thinking about it, reading about it, discussing it with colleagues, discussing cases with colleagues, everything that has to do with reflecting about clinical theory and cases would fit into the conceptual learning basket. And we love conceptual learning. It's incredibly important. Everyone here likes their own, psychotherapy models and theories. And that is very important, of course, to develop expertise as a psychotherapist. What is, however, often missing in many training programs is procedural learning, meaning learning by doing. We have found that most training programs emphasize a lot the resources of thinking about therapy and reading about therapy, but not so much practicing actual skills that you can use with your actual clients. So what often happens, and maybe some of you here might relate to this, is as your knowledge of therapy keeps increasing over time, your confidence in actually doing skills with clients might not increase at the same pace. So our kind of mission is to try to integrate conceptual learning with procedural learning. In other words, try to create more resources for therapists to also learn skills and practice skills that they can use with real clients. That's our mission. That's what we've been trying to do with deliberate practice supervision, not just the conceptual, not just the procedural, but trying to integrate both. In this mission, this has led myself and Tony to be editors and authors of this, or co-authors, I should say, for this book series for the American Psychological Association, a very nice rainbow-colored series, I should say. And so basically we have put out, I believe at this point, 11 books, and with many more still in development and to come. Each book provides deliberate practice skills for particular therapy models. So if we take, for example, the psychodynamic book or schema therapy book, each book has 10 to 12 skill building exercises that therapists can use to get really better at each skill, have it in their bones, not just understand it intellectually, but be able to actually use it, fluently, persuasively with a real client. So we've been developing these books for a couple of years now. We test these books and the exercises in them. And more recently, we are in the process of developing a book of deliberate practice for emotionally focused couples therapy. The authors are Sam Yinich and Hannah Levinson. So today, we want to talk about the uses of deliberate practice in the context of emotionally focused couples therapy, but also because we have our very special guest, Sharon, today, we want to talk about the process of thinking about the lawyer practice in the larger context of emotionally focused couples therapy supervision, and why it also matters for supervision to do skills training, explicit skills training. Before I jump right in, I'll ask a few questions to Sharon. What I'm just sharing here now is the table of contents for that upcoming APA book for the lawyer practice for EFCT. The book should be out sometime next year. You can see it covers a lot of ground, all the way from validation, attachment frame validations, providing rationales, gathering and assembling elements of emotion, slicing it thinner, catching bullets. So there's a lot. Each exercise helps the trainee or the therapist to repeatedly practice that specific skill until they feel confident in it. But let's step back just a little bit, and I'll actually stop sharing my screen now. And I want to kind of pass the ball to Sharon. And first of all, thank you for being here, Sharon, with us.
Thank you for having me.
Hey. And I guess the first question would be to get your take on why is the lawyer practice, in your opinion, even relevant for emotionally focused couples therapy and its training? Why did you gravitate towards it? Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I jumped on it when I found out about it because in my own learning process, I find that there are so many different things you're trying to keep track of. You've got two different people, you've got the dynamic between them, you've got your own reactions to each of the different people, and you've got the model. And by the time you've kept track of all of that, what is it you're supposed to say in this moment? So I think of it like getting some interventions really in your muscle memory as much as possible, so that, if somebody has just said something absolutely appalling about their partner, you don't have to spend a lot of time trying to figure out what to do with that. You just come out and validate why they might say that and reflect on how it would affect their partner, rather than it just makes it a lot easier for you to process your own reactions to something like that.
Now, I have to say, I think you're quite courageous because you're now, in the supervisor residency at Sentio. You've been learning the supervision model and how to integrate the lawyer practice into your supervision. You want to tell us a little bit about what's different in this type of supervision you're practicing and its challenges? How has the process been for you?
Well, EFT supervision model really wants a lot of role play, but a lot of people resist that. And so one of the things that's different is really reminding myself that if I demonstrate something that they might say, to make sure that they say it and then do it again and then do it again. And it gives you really good entree to work with EFT, we call it the risk voice, but your attunement and your prosody and your body language, because you're observing all of that while they're giving it, and then you can go back and give them that feedback right there. Otherwise, it's a little bit harder to give that particular feedback.
If I remember correctly, I believe you also brought some of the lawyer practice influence to some peer group where you were doing work together. I'm curious, what was the reaction of you bringing those influences?
Well, we have a peer group that meets once a month, and we tried out for Sam and Hannah, we tried out some of the exercises, and it definitely goes differently than if you're in a supervision where some person is giving feedback. But everybody really enjoyed it, and they actually found it somewhat vulnerable, but they also to get that kind of specific feedback that they weren't used to getting. But we dug into some interesting things as each person gave their take on what the response would be to the exercise.
Alex, can I jump in just briefly? Sharon, I think you brought up a really important point when you say how it can feel vulnerable. Because we're used to learning about therapy, by kind of talking about it, or in grad school, we might write papers about it or that kind of thing. And there's something about actually rehearsing therapy with like real challenging scenarios from therapy that is vulnerable on multiple levels. So there's the most obvious level is you're getting feedback from someone else. So when you screw it up, someone's like, oh, you screwed that up, and that feels kind of vulnerable. But there's another more subtle layer of vulnerability, which is our emotional reaction to the challenging scenario, which, whether you call it emotional reaction or countertransference or whatever model you're working from. And then sometimes we feel our own experiential avoidance, like, whoa, I don't want to have that feeling. And so we get all guarded against it. And all that gets flushed out. One of the kind of secret goals of deliberate practice is to flush all that out. And so we're able to see our own quote unquote resistance to engaging with clients in challenging scenarios in ways that might not appear. If we're just reading the book on EFT, we're like, oh, this seems pretty straightforward how Sue Johnson's describing it. I'll just do that. Like, what's going to be hard about that, right? And then not until we're rehearsing. Go ahead.
She's so good that often people wonder how they can do what she does. But it's also, this particular group are all experienced therapists. And so they've gotten used to not having people look at what they're doing. And so, they're wondering what their peers are thinking of them. And I think that's what made it so vulnerable.
The exercises are designed to be helpful from beginning trainees to advanced practitioners, which surprises people. It's like, whoa, how could that be possible? But you're saying
we get something out of every single one. Some of them, there were a few that were very simple, but we just were going from top to bottom, and it goes easier to hard. So experienced therapists might, try the harder ones, but it actually took a while to get used to the format of this scenario that's in the book. They're all really pretty realistic scenarios in the portions that we've seen so far.
We're going to run through one later, so everyone's going to get to try one.
So I think, Sharon, you're also touching on something really important, is that there's two different kinds of difficulties in doing these exercises. Well, at least two. I'm sure there are many. One is the purely technical difficulty of doing the skill, like being able to do the words and do the tone of voice, etc. And also something we found out is how emotionally evocative it is to do the skills. Like you were both talking about the vulnerability that comes with it. But also surprisingly, even if you're just role-playing over and over client statements and therapist responses, we've seen that trainees really have an activation of feeling, and supervisors need to be attuned to that and be quite responsive to the trainees' ongoing affect. So I'm kind of curious, in your experience as a supervisor, how has that played a role in trying to incorporate more skill building and having to track the trainees' reactions? Because that's a pretty important element to this.
I'm not sure I'm following all of that. I know one thing is that a lot of trainees at first are a little reluctant to get emotive, like, wow, and this is not uncommon to have something like, oh God, that is so difficult. And the trainees are usually uncomfortable with being expressive in that way. But also, everybody's in some kind of relationship. And it feels to me like couples therapy is extremely evocative for the couples therapist. So whether it's the same kind of a style that you have, or it's the opposite style from what you have, you've already come up with your coping skills for dealing with that style. And so you can easily end up with you being in a protective move when you're trying to help them get out of their protective moves. Does that address what you were asking about?
Totally. It kind of bridges
So
with
you have to kind of see what I read them more or less the same way I would a client. Like, how do they look?
right.
Like this, I was just in a session with somebody, and I said, you look a little bit like deer in the headlights.
A
How
supervision,
are
you
you
mean?
doing?
Yeah. Right.
To the supervisee. Yeah.
Right. Well, bridging what you just said, so going back here, so I know this list didn't. So this is Hannah Levinson and Samini's list of exercises for the upcoming book. I'm curious, in your experience, both as training for this model, but also training others in the model. Maybe there are some skills here that resonate with you, maybe others that, of course, would be missing because there are so many exercises we could do for the model. I'm curious, what in your opinion are the skills in EFCT that most trainees can get intellectually, but have a hard time doing procedurally, real client? Do you have an opinion on that?
I'm not sure I do. I think, let's see, there's got to be gathering and assembling the elements of emotion. I think looks a lot easier than it may be. And again, in this session I was just in, she said that she wanted to understand how to get them from talking about behavior to talking about emotions, but they were mentioning emotions all the way through. So you just, but part of it is she was uncomfortable with interrupting. And that's certainly one that you can explain how to do it, but unless you really try it, you're not going to be able to do it.
Right. So we find this quite often, that trainees might intellectually understand the concept or the theory behind a certain skill, but if you actually ask them to do it, let's say slicing it thinner, they can understand it somewhat. Then you say, could you actually try it out with this video we have of a client? Not as easy.
Yeah.
Tony,
and then, the most challenging thing for me with DP, because it's really, really good when there's a particular sentence or two sentences that you can give them to say right then. But if they need to understand going through a whole procedure or going through from step to step to step, it's still possible. It still works well. And it's really helped me refine how I think about it, to first give it to them at kind of higher level chunks, and then take each chunk and practice it. And I think that's a lot more than I ever would have done before DP.
Tony, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I mean, the feedback we've gotten from our trainees is, of all the different models we're teaching and that the trainees are practicing, the EFT for couples is one of the hardest for them to learn. And I mean, it's not a surprise. It, working with a couple rather than one person and tracking the cycle, there's a lot going on. And so we found that we'll have students who go through the orientation and the basic training in EFT, and they feel like, oh, okay, this makes sense, I get it. And then they start practicing, and then they realize like how little they actually know. And so there's a kind of a reckoning process in deliberate practice that is really valuable. And it really helps each trainee find what we call their zone of proximal development. So where are they individually getting stuck? Because you teach 10 different trainees, you put them through the externship, and they're all going to walk out stuck in different areas.
Right.
And we can't know, but the rehearsal flushes that out.
Right. And of course, to be fair, you only have, what is it, like 3 or 4 hours that you're giving them in training, and the externship is 4 days, and core skills is 4 weekends, and you're still not quite sure what you're doing when you get through all of that.
Yeah, well, our hope, and it'd be great to study this empirically sometime, is that getting the deliberate practice in sooner can actually accelerate the learning process overall.
I think it will help them very much take in the material when they're in the training,
Yeah.
in the official EFT training.
Yeah, because we've had a bunch of trainees join the externship after doing deliberate practice with us for a few months. And then I think they're able to absorb the externship a lot better because they've been rehearsing it.
Yeah, I think so.
So we're kind of teasing up to the exercise. Maybe we can actually jump into that and give people a taste of what the oral practice looks like in emotionally focused couples therapy. So we chose to focus on the exercise of catching bullets in stage 2 specifically, because for the upcoming book, we actually have 2 catching bullets as in the model. So the way these exercises work, I'll just walk us through slowly, is each exercise deconstructs, let's say, the jargon, the name of the skill, into trainable therapist behaviors, right? So each of these numbered statements you see up here is what we call a skill criteria. So skill criteria are the therapist's behaviors that anyone can practice in order to try to repeatedly refine and master the skill. It takes, by the way, a lot of time to get to these skill criteria, because sometimes in the literature it's quite broad when we talk about some of these concepts. So the book authors are always, I feel, very courageous to be able to deconstruct jargon into skill criteria. So in the case of catching bullets in stage 2, let's imagine you really want to get better at this skill and practice doing it with real couples. Here's the criteria to practice it. First, the therapist should ask if you can interrupt the partner that's currently speaking, noting that something important has just happened. So the first is just interrupting the partner, noting something important happened. Secondly, the therapist reflects on attachment longings in the partner's comment and the partner's hurtful response, the bullet. So we start by interrupting, then we reflect attachment longings we picked up on and the partner's hurtful comment. Finally, we can end our intervention as a therapist with 2 options. We can either ask an open-ended question about what was happening for the partner, or we can conjecture that the partner's hurtful response, the bullet, happened due to disorientation, disbelief, or overwhelm about what their partner was saying. Now, I want to go back to what Sharon was just saying. This is a good example of a longer therapist intervention, a therapist skill that is quite complex, that once you actually start to decompose it, you'll find it has all these different criteria. And frankly, for a beginning trainee, you might just practice the first criteria first and nothing else, right? And Sharon has a lot of experience at this point doing. I've seen tapes of Sharon doing this masterfully. She will ask the trainee to just practice the first criteria. Now just practice the second criteria. Now the third. Well, now let's put it all together, right? But let's try it. We're gonna practice together a little bit. So let's see an example where the first partner in the couple says, "I feel alone in this relationship. You're always uninterested in the things that matter to me at work and in doing things with my family or friends." Second partner responds, "Why would I want to join you? As soon as we are with others, you just walk off and forget that I'm there. You don't really care about anyone else but yourself." So this would be the bullet, right? So let's see an example therapist response meeting these criteria. Therapist could start by saying, "Let me interrupt you for a moment. Something important just happened." So this meets the first criteria of interrupting the partner, noting something important happened. So when your partner said they felt so alone when you seem uninterested to socialize with their family and friends, you responded with some pretty strong pushback. So this is a therapist reflecting the attachment longings in the partner's comment and the partner's hurtful response. Finally, let's give you the 2 options. Therapist could end by saying, "I'm wondering what was going on for you just before you responded." So that meets option 1 here, ask an open-ended question about what was happening for the partner. Or, second option, I'm wondering if you were a bit disoriented, hearing how alone your partner feels without you at their side. You've longed to hear that for so long, but the message you'd receive was the exact opposite. And that would fulfill the second option here, conjecture that the partner's hurtful response, the bullet, is due to disorientation, disbelief, or overwhelm about what their partner was saying. So, Sharon, this is a pretty complex skill. We kind of started with a hard one just to give people a taste. But at the same time, I guess this is a real good example of what you have to do in a real supervision as well, right? Is sometimes you're modeling these long interventions because EFCT is a complex model, right?
Yes. Yes. Particularly when you're trying to assemble emotions to get it into something that you can help them say to each other. It's a sequence that you have to go all the way through, otherwise you don't get anything at the end.
Right. Something I've learned from watching you supervise, Sharon, is sometimes the best thing is really to model the intervention first and then try to decompose it into its parts to understand what exactly is this exercise, is the skill we're doing, right?
Well, that's the interesting other side of it. So once I've gotten some of this stuff into my muscle memory, I don't think I could do it in the other order. What I have to do is say whatever comes out of me and then figure out what the parts were that I said so that they can take it in.
Right, right. Well, so let's try it. So our invitation is that everyone here, whoever wants to join, we're not going to call on anyone to try it out with your microphone. We're actually going to try it together. If you want, whoever wants it, to write on the Zoom chat a therapist response that meets these criteria. And for criteria 3, you can choose either option 1 or 2. So I'm going to provide a new scenario here. And let's see whoever wants to try writing a response, and Sharon will provide feedback to people's response. So let's imagine partner 1 says, I don't feel that I deserve you. I feel completely inadequate in this relationship. Partner 2 says, oh, really? Are you even trying? Okay. So let's give people a minute and try writing a response that meets the criteria for this situation.
Great. Here's one. I'm going to read this for you, Sharon, okay? It's in the
Okay.
chat as well. Let me interrupt for a moment. Something important just happened. I heard you say that this person doesn't seem to be trying. However, I am also hearing that this person is feeling inadequate when they do try. What is something this person can do to demonstrate that they're trying?
Okay, so the open-ended question here is so this question that they have on the end, what is something this person can do to demonstrate that they're trying, is probably not something we would say in EFT, although it definitely makes sense. An open-ended question here is what is happening for the partner? So what's going on for you that you can't see any trying? That makes sense. As there, something like that would be. So, what is happening for you when you say that you're not even seeing the trying?
So they got the first part of option 1, ask an open-ended question, but not the second part, which is about what is happening for the partner.
Absolutely.
And this is a good demonstration of why EFT is hard, is because there's multiple parts to the skills and all the parts matter.
And it makes sense to want to ask them, well, what do you want? You know?
Right. Right. Yeah. That question is a valid therapy question, of course. Right. But it's not in the EFT
but probably
model.
not one we would ask in EFT.
Right. Great. Okay, great. Thank you for that. Here's another one. I'm going to read this here. Let's stop for a moment to hear what partner 1 just said. I'm picking up they are longing to feel worthy of this relationship. What comes up for you hearing that, partner 2?
Okay, on this one, there was an interruption, and they reflected on the longings for the one, but not so much for the other. And then what was that like for you to hear that?
What comes up for you hearing that?
I want to see if I can get it where I can see it, because I'm not following the
Okay.
pronouns.
If you open the chat,
Here, yeah, I've got it.
it's
What comes up for you hearing that, partner two?
partner two.
So that feels a little funny to me, that what comes up for you hearing that, because I feel like they said it. So I think part of what you're trying to do here is soften it for the one who just the ashamed partner as well. So that fits, this response fits the criterion, and the criterion doesn't really mention that part of what you're trying to do is soften it for the first speaker. So that might be something that should change in the actual exercise.
So that goes beyond the criteria then. So they met the criteria.
That goes beyond the criteria. So my response to this response is going beyond the criterion.
Right.
Otherwise, it fits the criterion.
Got it. Okay. All right, great. Let's keep that in mind. Here's another one. If you want to see the next one, Sharon, from Sophia. Excuse me, partner two. Let's take a moment here to breathe and process. Partner one shared with us how inadequate they feel in your relationship. And I also heard you saying that you feel they are not even trying. How did you, partner two, feel when you heard partner one say how inadequate they feel?
Right. So I think this follows all of the criteria here. And I particularly like the let's take a moment to breathe and process, because there's something happening, something protective coming up in partner two here. They have been longing to hear this for for a long time, and they're just now hearing it. So they're reacting in this protective way, and just recognizing that it's good to calm down is really helpful there.
Great. Something I would like to highlight here is in your feedback, Sharon, that you give to this one, and particularly the last one too, is you're giving pretty subtle and nuanced feedback, right? I get the impression these are therapists who work with couples. These are not beginning trainees, you know, and so you're really kind of optimizing or tweaking responses. And you know, I want to highlight this because one of the concerns that's raised about deliberate practice is supervisors are like, oh, you're going to turn my trainees into robots, or, you know, do a mechanistic, you know, approach to therapy. And what you're seeing is the exact opposite, is that deliberate practice is giving people the opportunity to experiment, to try things out, to stretch, to be like, what if I say this, or what if I say this? And then Sharon can come in with very subtle tweaks, you know, and propose, well, maybe a little of this or maybe a little of that. And it really helps the therapist or trainee kind of develop their own personal, unique style. Alex, what's that quote by Miles Davis about that?
It takes a long time to be able to play like yourself.
Yeah, it takes a lot of practice to be able to play like yourself, or to be a therapist like yourself. And you're kind of seeing that process. Should we do another one here? This is from David. Sharon, if you want to read along in the chat. Let's stop if we can here to discuss this. It feels like an important exchange. Partner one, You seem to be opening up about fearing you don't deserve this relationship, even though you really want it. Partner 2, you seem surprised and maybe even disoriented by what your partner said. Something about your partner's comment really doesn't make sense from your perspective, huh?
Now that one feels right down the center in terms of validating both of them, even though one person has said something hurtful about the other one. And the part we don't necessarily see is that probably partner 2 was really hurt by feeling like I don't deserve the relationship. So that follows the criterion because that goes to option 2. And it's reflecting what both people have done. And it's in one of them earlier, I almost got the feeling that somebody was having a transference reaction about the "are you even trying" comment, and this one doesn't have that at all. And it can definitely be really transformed by hearing them give it, because this kind of thing, you really need to lean in, reflect the hurt from your body and from your voice, and reflect that both are showing hurt. It really isn't just a mean response, but it sure sounds like it.
So that was a real strength to this one, Sharon, is like you say, down the middle, reflecting both.
Right.
Great. So Sharon brought up something else I'd like to highlight is, so what you're doing here in terms of typing your responses is not actually how you'd be doing deliberate practice. In real deliberate practice, you'd be saying your responses. And then Sharon would be able to give you feedback on your tone of voice, your rhythm, your engagement, your lean, the whole thing. We can't do that here because, we've got 20 people in a webinar and everyone would be talking over each other.
And to that point, Tony, what's fascinating is that even if we just have the verbal written down responses, there is so much potential for feedback. So imagine, just for everyone here, imagine if you're actually role playing it and have a supervisor near you, the amount of feedback you can get by actually trying out the skill present to your supervisor, saying out loud and getting immediate feedback. For most people know this is how everyone gets better at skills. If you've ever practiced a sport or practiced a musical instrument, you know that you'll get better by basically doing it in front of a teacher and getting immediate feedback. But in our experience, very little people actually have this opportunity in supervisory and psychotherapy training, I should say. So I always, there's a quote that Tony often uses that I like to steal from, which is gravity is always pulling us away from rehearsal. And so one thing that we always try to teach our supervisors at our residency is to monitor how much we are not doing rehearsal, how much we are not practicing and repeating practicing skills, because the temptation is always to just start talking about therapy, not to actually do the skill. You want to add to that?
I mean, it's especially with EFT. I mean, there's so much to talk about, right? I mean, there's so many interesting topics. And your trainee will sit there and nod their head and, pretend that they're following you, and they'll enjoy it. I mean, they love hearing us talk about therapy and how complex it is, and they have a great time. And it's a lot easier than them having to rehearse and screw up in front of you and get your feedback.
Well, and also an important part of the process when you're doing it live is that once they've I'm usually modeling because I'm not working with a canned exercise, but once they've done it, I ask them to do it again and probably again, so that it gets into their bones. And so I'll give them some kind of feedback. Well, you left this piece out, or no, not that word. That word doesn't have the right feel to it. And then at the very end, I'm looking for, it's not till at least 3 times that they're really getting intonation, because mostly they're reciting. It sounds like they're reciting when they're recalling it.
Which is okay at first.
Yes, of course it is.
And so it gives them an opportunity to do all this without a real client in front of them. I know when I was in beginning training, I would read textbooks, by Beck and the other famous gurus of therapy, and I'd memorize their lines from their transcripts. And then I would say those lines to my clients, and my clients were having none of it. They're just like, it sounds like you memorized that, Tony. Like, they totally busted me on it. And it's because I hadn't rehearsed, like I hadn't made it my own. Here's another one from Lila here. I'm going to read this too, Sharon. Let me interrupt you here. Something really important just happened. It sounds like partner one is really longing to feel deserving of your love and relationship. You have been feeling inadequate, and your partner reinforced that and maybe even overwhelmed you, saying that you didn't even think you were trying.
Okay, so this one is a really good affirmation of the person who took the risk. Most likely this was a risk, but it doesn't validate the person who said the mean thing. And I think that part is really important.
That's easy to miss, I imagine.
Right. Because it's their protective move. And that means that, they're in a tough spot. They wouldn't say that if they weren't in a tough spot. But it definitely comes out sounding mean, and it hits therapists that way a lot. Like, oh, what on earth makes you think this is going to make your relationship get better? Is the reaction.
And so Sharon, would you say one of the benefits of rehearsing this is the therapist is kind of building a thick skin, or just an ability to tolerate this the bullets, right?
Yes. Particularly, at least in my own development, I've been really focusing on an attachment validation for the worst behavior you can imagine. Gosh, it makes so much sense that you're yelling and screaming and throwing things. You just don't know what to do. You're just lost in this attachment panic, and it feels like your whole world is falling apart.
Wow.
Of course, the problem is that's not going to work, but it makes a lot of sense to me. So, I mean, if it's as bad as throwing things, you do have to kind of speak up for safety, but it makes sense. There's so much going on inside you that you just can't contain.
And that just feels very like so then that client feels very heard.
Right. And it usually, if their anger, this is a saying from one of my teachers, George Fowler, if their anger has met its purpose, it will diminish.
And the purpose is to be heard.
Yes.
Wow.
I want to point out something also I find very fascinating every time we do these webinars, and it just happened, which is we just went through a single example of the skill and a single experiment test, right? In the actual exercise, there are 15 of these client scenarios, 15 different ones. And therapists could practice over and over and over with 15 different ones. So imagine if we got so much out of one client scenario. How much practice we can get out of 15 of those.
Well, there's 15 per exercise. So there's, over 150 in the book. And
example therapist responses as well, just like Sharon, because unfortunately not everyone can have Sharon as a supervisor at a moment's notice. So having in the books as well the example therapist responses helps you model an intervention that you could do. So I actually left the link for the current books available for the book series. The EFCT book is not out yet, but it will be hopefully during next year. I also left on the chat the Sentio Counseling Center link if anyone wants. Go ahead, Tony.
Sophia, I just want to read Sophia's comment. She said, for training purposes, when she uses the systemic family therapy book from the series, she has the students first think and write down a sample response before they share it with the class. This is for first year's master's students. That's a great idea, is to kind of give the students, and especially because these are very new students, first year's master's students,
Right.
And they're learning systemic therapy, and there's a lot of moving parts in systemic therapy, kind of like the couples therapy, to give them an opportunity to kind of to encounter the skill intellectually first. And that really reduces the emotional demands of the exercise. And so to, you know, let them kind of get the intellectual lay of the land, and then try it in a state of higher emotional activation. I appreciate that, Sophia. I think that's a really good idea to do that.
That's great. I'm curious if, as we're kind of drawing to a close, Sharon, do you have any kind of last advice for people who might be interested in incorporating a little bit of the lore practice into either for their personal work or for their students? Any takeaway messages you want to leave for attendees?
I guess what I'm thinking is that there's room for other types of supervision for EFT, particularly when people are getting close to certification, because then you're looking at judging a 20-minute piece of work. But I just think this is a great way to get. Well, the other thing that I've done is done deliberate practice in a role play context where we move from intervention to intervention, and I might give the intervention, the student gives the client response, and I might give the intervention, then the student practices the intervention, and then we move on from there to the next client response. And I've only accomplished that like once, because most of my supervisees are really, really early in the process.
Right. So you're providing a lot of modeling for them to try out the skill.
Right.
Right. Great. Great. I mean, go ahead, Tony.
Yeah, if I was to leave everyone with a parting thought, I'd say this is something we keep having to learn again and again, which is we can never start too simple. Like the most frequent mistake we make is moving ahead too quickly. And the poor trainees just feel dragged along. For us to try to remember what it was like to be a first-year trainee and be like, whoa, and you know, bite-sized chunks are the way we learn anything, whether it's soccer or guitar or chess or to fly a plane or EFT.
And EFT is usually harder than all those things. So
harder than all those, yes. Yes.
Well, I want to thank so much, Sharon, for you being here with us and providing great feedback and notes.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, everyone, for attending.